Hey everyone, welcome back to Inventing Construction. I'm Ross Griffin, and today we have a very special guest, Peter Poulsen, or Peter Fangel Poulsen. I hope I pronounced that right. My Danish is getting much, much better, everyone. But today's main topic, the cost of sustainability in Denmark. And our subtopics, we're going to discuss the drive for sustainability in Denmark. How has the market changed in the last number of years? Are we missing the cost connection to sustainability? That's an interesting one for us, of course, as cost managers. And how does Peter see things developing in the future? But Peter, perhaps you should introduce yourself first of all. And did I pronounce your name correctly?
I think you did fine.
Excellent.
I think you did fine.
Excellent.
Yes, my name is Peter Fangel Poulsen. That is the Danish pronunciation, so that's pretty close. And I am owner and founder of the company BAUHERR. And we are a client consultancy company. We are situated here in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
We share premises together with Cosmos at the moment. And that is a very fortunate position, because what we are doing is, you could say, general management from a client's perspective in construction projects, and you're doing cost management. And these two disciplines, they sort of mingle very well together.
Yeah, it's great to be down in Blocks, actually. It's our office is very nice and comfortable, and lovely courtyard and so on. But Peter, let's have a chat about cost or sustainability. So in Denmark, there has been big changes in the last 5, 6, 8 years in Denmark in relation to sustainability within construction. And it seems to be growing every month, every year, right? How have you seen that change developing?
It has been increased in its intensity over the past, I don't know how many years. It's basically been around for quite some time.
Yeah.
But of course, the whole climate change discussion, the focus, the rather clear evidence from the scientific side has created a number of movements in Denmark where this is just becoming, you can't really avoid it, or you can't say it's not around. You need to deal with it.
Yeah. And from a client advisory perspective, are you seeing more clients asking now asking the sustainability question, or asking for sustainability to be included? Or is it the most prominent question that they're asking you these days?
It's more like it's an included comment now. It's not really, it's everybody needs it. You cannot avoid it. You need to address it one way or another. There are, of course, different levels, how much you want to engage into it. But almost every client needs to address the questions on sustainability one way or another.
Yeah, so it's almost business as usual at this stage in Denmark.
There's a number of disciplines that needs to come, that needs to be connected with our advice. And also what you're doing, I suppose, because usually we were very focused on when we were calculating cost, but now we also need to calculate carbon. So that is another discipline that just comes in. It's sort of the same thing to do. It's just another currency, you can say. So, but that is, and we've improved on these disciplines for the past years. Is of course not as well developed as when we're discussing costs. In terms of money. But it is improving. And then other sustainability disciplines are coming in now that we have rather little knowledge on how to do, to be frank. That could be biodiversity. How do we actually calculate that? But we also need to address the chemicals soon. We need to address resources, because we also have scarce resources. So there is a number of things.
So the entire circularity really is becoming well, I guess that's where sustainability in its traditional sense is now heading towards the circularity of it all.
Yes.
Can we continue to build in the same intensity as we have been? Have we got the available resources globally to allow us to do that?
Yes.
And that's
we can't.
And we can't is the
answer. No, that's pretty simple. I mean, here in Denmark, we have the global overshoot days at like early March or something, or perhaps even late February now. Meaning that we are spending our fair share of the globe's resources within 2 or 3 months. That we should, basically distribute for a whole year. So, we are over consuming in this part of the world, and also here in Denmark.
When you consider that within a 2-month period, we're spending 12 months of resource.
We've done that for some time.
How are we going to pull the industry? And I guess it's not just the industry; it's the entire country back, so that we extend to a 12-month consumption?
That is a good question, Ross. I think there is not a simple answer to that question. Yeah. There is a number of things that needs to be done. Basically, you need to acknowledge that the problem is around. I think that acknowledgement is about to be in position in the industry. But the next thing is, and this is perhaps where we're lacking a little bit, is the really good business models on how to tackle this.
Yeah.
How do we make it a good business? Because if you can make sense in terms of the costing and the climate issues, it makes a lot of sense, and things will move very rapidly.
Yeah.
Right now, it's perhaps a little bit done based on good intentions.
Yeah, which sometimes isn't. It's very difficult to measure good intentions. Your good intentions might be far superior to my good intentions, but they're still good intentions nevertheless between the two of us. But we need to be able to measure them somehow. And I think you're right that perhaps business as usual isn't what it's going to look like in the future as it looks like today. That our traditional capitalism and capitalist approach perhaps isn't going to fit our circularity approach in the future.
It's definitely a hot topic here. I don't know if it's that hot in the remaining part of Europe, but up here it's driving a lot.
Yeah,
and people want to see that change, and we want to take our responsibilities seriously.
Yeah. If I compare it to Ireland, for example, where we're kind of involved in that discussion on sustainability, I would argue that biodiversity is only coming into a conversation now. The real conversation is still carbon, green building certification. We haven't really hit the biodiversity topic yet because we're trailing behind Denmark's development in that way, which actually is a positive thing because we can look to Denmark and say, okay, what have you guys done over the last 10 years? How can we learn from you so we don't make the same mistakes in our development, being a similar sized country, similar sized population, etc. So in that sense, I think we can work very well together, bringing that knowledge and experience and then assisting in countries like Ireland to develop their strategies. But the challenges are still the same at the end of the day, right? Because
it's a global problem. Yeah. And I think you're right. We might be a little bit ahead of you in Ireland. I don't know Ireland very well, but so perhaps that's a little bit premature for me to say so. But nonetheless, I think we could share some of our knowledge and experience over here with you guys over there. One of the things that's moving right now, because and I'm not quite sure if Ireland is using the BREEAM system, or is that still the predominant way of considering a sustainability approach to construction projects. But over here, it seems to be moving away from these certification. Yeah. These are still around. We're not using BREEAM very much, but we're using the DGNB system. German, But I think the movement right now is actually to look very much more focused on LCA calculations. Yeah. And there will be a new building regulations over here where we are lowering the thresholds for how much CO2 or embodied carbon you can have within a construction to obtain a building permit. Yeah. So LCAs are really important. Yeah. And I think they also provide a very, very sensible tool for everybody to understand and make decisions upon.
Well, I guess one thing is that the LCA is now mandated as part of your building application when looking for building permit, whereas the green building certification is more of a organizational strategy in order to do business, right? So companies are looking to certify their buildings so that when going to the marketplace, they can promote these green buildings that they have, whether it's BREEAM or DGNB. But the reality is that, those certifications are just certifications. They're not really driving full-on sustainability within the building regulations. One of our colleagues, we talked about it in the past, how perhaps the certifications haven't really caught up with the LCA carbon requirements yet, and there's a little bit of an alignment to happen across.
You might be right on that, actually. Yeah.
And they'll need to catch up if they want to be relevant, won't they? Yeah. Especially if biodiversity comes into the entire
for discussion. Sure. And that is the whole industry here don't know really how to deal with the biodiversity. A number of initiatives will be setting sails here, I think this year or soon, because we can't really wait.
No.
and that will also deal with. That will be another instrument to follow and to track when you do construction projects. And I think the EU also, and the way that you actually assess buildings, and if you're a bigger company, you will be forced to track your construction projects also in terms of quantities and how they perform in terms of biodiversity or carbon or other things.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest shifts, I would say. One thing is assessing carbon as part of your building permit, but the other aspect is actually that ESG reporting for organizations. So any publicly listed company now has to report on their 2024, the year 2024 next year on ESG. And that's a first move now for companies. That is it's very new within the industry.
That is being driven from Brussels.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is what we need. We need basically to have something that comes from above, and then combine that with very sane business models. That makes it a natural choice to move more sustainable decisions.
And one of the things we've noticed is that the market will shift in that direction as well. We hear a lot about green financing, and we hear a lot about the market looking for green options, whether it's materials or greener buildings that they can rent or purchase, etc. So the market is kind of also shifting towards those green initiatives, which is good as well.
We hope so. I just read in the paper just before coming here this morning. There's because one of the business propositions will be also to transform buildings as they are,
the retrofit,
rather than tearing them down and building something new. So you actually need to reuse existing structures, and they might not be very, appealing in the way that they are right now. So I read this story about this concrete 70s or perhaps even 60s high rise in Aarhus that's just been desolate for some time, and it's not a house that you would build today. And you could, of course, tear it down, but it represents a huge amount of embodied carbon within all that concrete that is in it. So now Domir, who is the owner of the building, they want to transform that one way or another. And I can see that creates a number of architectural discussions. How can you actually transform some would say perhaps even, I wouldn't say an ugly building, but something that is perhaps from a past time. And create something which is where you want to live today. That is one of the challenges that we have. We have to find a clever way to do it. But nonetheless, it's an architectural aspect, you could say, challenge for them, and it's also a way where we need to find also legislative ways to deal with it, that we can transform buildings from perhaps one functionality to another. So it's including planning systems that we need to redirect or change, as well as building regulations, as well as financial models. We have to be able to repurpose buildings like this. And I think for the first time, perhaps it's becoming a real challenge for architects to reimagine existing spaces like that. Also to make them attractive, as you mentioned, Damia being a social housing organization, and how do they transform that office space into kind of comfortable residential while reusing. We're having the same debate in Ireland and I know as well as in the UK, where the office market has dropped somewhat. There's a lot of available space. The older facilities are now not as popular or as in demand as the newer facilities because of sustainability. So how do we repurpose all of these facilities? And one of the big challenges that we're hearing is that accessibility, the layout of the building is not how you would design a residential. So how do we then repurpose these buildings into? Good idea. That's a good question. I cannot give you the answer, but this is one of the things that we need to change if we want to focus on the resources, because you cannot just throw away these resources that were put into these buildings. There is actually, I found this, it was a scientific project here in Denmark where, we have what we call the BBR registrations, basically meaning that all houses, they have sort of a little certificate saying where is it and how big it is and when was it also erected. So it has an age in the building. And these BBR registrations, they need to follow the house for its lifetime. But when they are torn down eventually, the BBR registration goes out. And somebody took all the BBR registrations that went out. And so what is the lifetime of a building?
Yeah.
And the sad fact was that the house here, whatever structure, it could be anything basically. It could be a stable or industry building or development building or whatever. It could be different things. But the sad thing was that the age was like 60, 70 years.
Yeah. And on
which
average.
is way, way, way too little.
Yeah.
I mean, way too little usage for such a huge investment, and also a huge investment in terms of resources.
It's really only one generation, isn't it? 60, 70 years?
Yeah,
like,
60,
and it needs to be much more than that.
Yeah. And the fact is, of course, all the buildings are not torn down upon, not part of that investigation. So the real figure is perhaps 100, 110 years.
Yeah.
But still, makes one wonder how long time should a house actually stand?
Yeah.
And basically, if you ask me, I think more than 100 years.
Yeah. The building we're in is probably 200 years old, coincidentally enough, here in central Copenhagen.
Yeah, maybe 150 or something. Yeah.
But you're right. If you reflect back maybe 15, 20 years ago, and the buildings we were designing then, if you looked at the materials themselves, the claddings, the windows, they were only given a 20-year life cycle. Going back 20, 30 years ago, which is now, we would look at that going, that's a bit crazy. 20 years.
That is also one of the things in the LCA calculations. They basically say that a house is 50 years lifespan.
Yes. Yeah.
So they do it on a 50-year lifespan. I can't really tell you why they do that.
Yeah.
There's probably a long and scientific explanation behind it. But basically, if that is what we see, then after 50 years, you basically change everything.
Yeah.
Then you have another problem.
Exactly. And 50 years is just, it's not long enough. And
no, for sure
this is another aspect to how our entire business models are changing now, is that even our return on investments, perhaps, when we look at buildings, needs to be a longer period in order so that we can invest more in the sustainability aspect. Construction becomes a little bit more expensive because we're investing in longer life cycles, and perhaps the return on investment for your organization isn't 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. Maybe it is actually 100 years return on investment for that organization. That might change that business model completely when investment in assets, perhaps. Yeah. Then again, we're not the ones to solve that, perhaps, but
I think it will create some sort of a movement. I'm not an expert in Chinese construction, but I see they've had a very, very steep curve in time in building and constructing new things, buildings, housing, whatever. Yeah. And I also have, and that might be unfair because I don't know it in detail, but I think they at least seen somewhere that they expect the life expectancies for these buildings to be rather short. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Yeah. And that is a very, very unsustainable way of seeing construction, also investing and investments. And we need to be some sort of an example here in Denmark how we can do this differently. Yeah. And in Europe, basically. Yeah. Because so much more is going to be built over the next 20 years.
Exactly, yeah.
And that is not going to be built here in Copenhagen. It's not going to be built in Ireland either. No. It's going to be built in Africa or in Asia or wherever the development is. Yeah. So there is definitely a huge need for better examples of how to deal with a more sustainable way of approaching construction business.
Especially when we're talking about brand new entire cities being built in order to facilitate growing populations, where we're not doing that in Denmark or Ireland or anywhere in Europe, really. But the reality is
our population is declining.
Yeah.
I mean, the rising population is going to be elsewhere in the world.
Exactly.
And they need a house too.
Yeah, exactly.
And the people who live there, they probably need a better house than they're living in already, because they're also increasing their life standard. Yeah. Yeah. And that calls for an intense way of erecting new buildings. And if we don't get out of the concrete problem, we're going to see huge global problem.
Yeah,
so we need to find another way to build.
Absolutely.
More biomaterials, for example, whether it's wood or something else.
Yeah,
local materials, and we need to find another way of approaching also the whole energy situation within the buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. And it we've been discussing the second point of how has the market changed over the last number of years, and I think you kind of had mentioned it that the requirements now are that clients are looking for more sustainable solutions. Perhaps certifications are taking a backseat to the LCA and carbon. this for sure will be rolled out across Europe in our understanding. It's already coming, and again, I'll reflect on Ireland. It's already coming in Ireland. It's now coming in Spain. People are looking at Denmark as that example of, hang on a second, these guys are doing it. Let's adopt their policies, etc., and let's drive that on. Which is it's super interesting for the industry. Like, along with our digitization transition over the last 20 years, we now have sustainability transitioning.
Yeah.
It probably the most disruptive time in our industry since the Industrial Revolution, perhaps,
But, and this is basically what our consultancy is about. We do a lot of sustainability strategies for our clients. How can you approach this in a better way? And it's funny you say the thing about digitization also, because that's also part of the solution, I would say, that we become a lot sharper actually understanding what the components of our buildings are, to be honest. And that is not only to understand how to, you can say, develop or tune the design, but it's also a matter of understanding how not to be more efficient when we erect buildings, because often the projects are not very sturdy or very firm. They have a lot of missing objects or missing information, which makes it difficult to construct. And then you make a lot of errors, and you make a lot of reworks, and you waste a lot of material, which is also not very good.
Yeah, indeed.
It's costing money. It's costing carbon. It's basically costing time and
which is money,
creating a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
So we need to use digitalization to become better at actually developing our projects and creating a better process when we are in the construction side.
Yeah.
That's also a part of it.
Yeah.
So there are so many components if you want to do this.
Yeah, there's definitely value in that for sure.
Very much.
We can't continue in the same challenges of trying to do this manual process. And I don't mean manual in terms of building the walls. I mean manual in terms of how we communicate and how we're structuring our information. It has to be digitized. Yeah. As you mentioned, reducing that waste output is also key. How many projects have we worked on where we've broken out floors and broken out walls because they're in the wrong location?
Yeah. And it's that is a waste of everybody's energy, to be honest. Yeah. And this is what you're doing in Cosmos. I realize that. You are working heavily with digitalization. So what we are basically creating the demands on behalf of our clients, because we don't do it ourselves, but we know how to deal with it. Yeah. So that we make sure that the architects or the engineers, that they can actually make fully compatible and working models. Yeah. So we can drag out the information that are needed to track the sustainable calculations or the cost calculation, but also the timetables and the logistics that are connected to any construction project.
One of the big changes I see, and the ones we're discussing with, is the life cycle assessment. LCA we talked about, with the life cycle costing then. Yeah. What's our strategy for running this building over the next 50 years? Yeah. Up until now, I don't think clients have put a lot of thought or effort into that. It was a case of, let's get the building built, and then we hand it over to facility and let them manage it. But now, because of the requirements, as you mentioned, sustainability and the new initiatives needed, we now need to understand what the plan is for the building. What's the business case, the cash flow for this building over the life cycle? Is it 50 years, 60 years, 100 years, whatever? We see that as one of the big changes coming down the track. It's already here in effect. And then linking that life cycle assessment, life cycle costing, to the life cycle assessment, the LCA, the whole life cycle assessment, so that we can understand the hotspots when it comes to the operation of our building. Yeah. Should we be spending more today on better equipment to reduce the maintenance, the retrofit later on down the road, the operation of that piece of equipment? Yeah. And I don't think we've got there yet in the industry in that sense. No. And I see that is really part of connecting cost to sustainability, is understanding, if we take an alternative option, what's the cost impact, what's the carbon impact, plus or minus. Yeah. So but
don't you see that they often follow each other?
They have to. Yeah.
I mean, when you bring up cost, you also bring up carbon. Yeah. I don't know why it is like that, because you could imagine that you could build something that was almost carbon-free materials, but were very costly. But for some reason, it just goes the other way. Yeah. Yeah. The costly components are also costly and carbon related. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a bit of a misconception maybe in the industry that carbon is expensive. And if we go with
better, greener products, they're more expensive. The reality is actually you need to do that assessment to understand what are we talking about when we say embodied carbon, operational carbon, the capital investment of that initial building and the operational investment. Because the reality is the capital investment is only 30% approximately. Don't quote me on that. 30% of the total project overall investment over its life cycle. So we really now need to start heavily focusing on operational.
I think it's even less the capital investment. I think so the Brits actually made some calculations. See the design process, if that is factor 1, the capital investment might be 3, and the running cost might be 10. But the real impact is if you do not design properly, so you make rooms or facilities that are not suitable for whatever purpose it has, function. You need to redo things. That is a factor 50 or something. So that's you really need to consider your design. You're doing very, very heavily impact in your decision making in the beginning in the design stages for later, both money and sustainable calculations and considerations.
So here's a question for you. Why are we always then squeezing our consultants, our design team on time and cost in those initial stages when we're setting up projects? Historically, you would see a lot of tenders and competitions focus heavily on the price and then not as heavily on the technical, etc. It's now changing for sure, but we still have this heavy focus on the cost of our architect, the cost of our engineer, when in reality, as you mentioned, it's very small.
It's very tiny cost compared to the real cost of what you're doing.
So is it better to invest more?
I think it's easy to understand. And as you know, you probably also experienced that some people are doing the projects and other people are doing the operation. That's basically two different parts of an organization. Could be the same company, but often it's different persons. So the ones who are doing the project, they have sort of an isolated task to do this. And they don't really necessarily speak very much to the ones over here. And the ones over here are not really, because they're heavily involved in doing whatever they do on a daily basis. They don't have the time to involve themselves into this. So that is one of the problems. But the other problem here is, because there are a number of things here, Ross. And one of the things that I see as an industry problem is that we are, here in Denmark at least, we have a common set of rules, a common set of contract rules, you could say, which is convenient because it's easy when you want to engage into a contract with an architect or a contractor. You pull out that from the drawer and say, here's the contract. Everybody knows what it's about. So that is sort of efficient. But that set of rules are not really taken care of. They're of course made by lawyers, and they're very much materialistic rules saying, you give me this, I pay you that. And then they'd also have a number of paragraphs of, if we disagree on something, we can use this as this conflict method, or we can disembark in one way or another. But what they do not include at all is the relations between the parties. It's not at all telling you anything about who are we and why are we doing this together. So another thing, so that particular set of rules creates what I call a silos in the industry. So from my point of view, being from the client side, we sort of invent an idea, we want to build this, and then we make a contract and ask an architect, can you do that? And that is based on a contract where we often judge it on what's the price for doing that? Because he's delivering something, I'm paying him. That's basically rules of structure. And then when he has done a design, he asks a contractor, can you build it? And the same sort of dynamic goes on again. So we have these silos where everybody's sort of independently connected to the same project, not really working together. And that is a huge problem, because then they basically the mode goes reverse afterwards. The contractor gets the drawings and then he begins asking questions. What is it actually you're drawn? And the thing that I priced on this is not on the drawings. So now you'll tell you what the real price is, and then price goes up, creates a lot of frustrations. And the architect goes back to the client and says, I have to tell you that I need to redesign this, I need to have more money, or something else is failing in your project. And it's sort of an evil circle of conflict. And I think that is a basic, that is a system that goes on all over. I wouldn't say all over the world because I don't know, but it's not only a Danish phenomenon that we have it like that. Yeah. So what we're trying to create is more collaborative ways of seeing how clients, consultants, meaning architects, engineers, and contractors together can utilize their knowledge about creating a project or creating a development, and also being paid fairly. Because when I speak to the contractors, we know that about 70% of the money in a construction project that goes to the contractor. Yeah. So that is the majority of the cost. And they are not particularly, they don't see this as particularly efficient or glamorous business model for them to claim everything all the time just to find holes in the project. They would rather have a full project where they understand they can build it on time and to the right quality. That's basically what they're here for. Yeah. So we need to find more collaborative ways, and we basically also need to readdress our common rules of construction here.
Yeah, and so in order to change this sustainability outlook for the future, actually, we really need to look at our industry as a whole. It's not just about adding LCA and adding life cycle costings to our current process. It's actually looking at how are we delivering our projects traditionally, and what's the common way of delivering, and does that methodology actually fit how we need to deliver in the future? One thing that comes to my mind, and as a quantity surveyor and cost manager in Denmark, I have been discussing with clients over the last 15 years about quantities. Yeah. Why good quantities are important, why the client should develop quantities to understand their building, etc. And it was always a challenge, because clients would look at, if they prepare quantities, then it's their risk. Whereas our kind of suggestion was, well, if you prepare quantities, you're reducing your risk, because you understand then what it is that is in the design material, you're understanding what is in the contract with the contractor. But what we can see now is that LCA is requiring us on the client side to have quantities. Even if you don't want quantities as a client for cost, you now need it for LCA. And I see that as a major shift in the industry from a quantities perspective. I don't know.
Definitely.
If you experienced it.
It is funny you say so, because I'm very much fan of quantities also. And I think you can use them for so much many things. LCA is one thing, cost is another, time is a third one, but you could basically, and of course also describing a design, there's many things that you could use it for. Yeah. Also from a client's perspective. And I've also met in the industry, also from the client side, that now can't really do quantities because it's just creating a lot of disturbance, and it's a lot of work, and it's not really efficient enough. Where should you put how precise should you be, and all these things. Yeah. But I think it's rubbish. Yeah. I think you can use it for very, very many value creating elements. Yeah. And I think you will be guided to it right now, as you say, with the LCAs. Yeah. But I think the other thing is that one of the problems that the clients have envisioned with quantities is that, as you say, the quantities, they come out of the BIM models, they come out of the drawings that are made by the architects, engineers, this amount of walls or ceiling or whatever. And when you then tender it to a contractor, they sort of don't take the responsibility for the quantities. They say, well, that's something, if there's a mistake over here, then I'll come back. Yeah. So you need to transfer these
risks or responsibility.
So the responsibility is common.
Yeah.
And everybody needs to understand why the quantities are such, that this is the amount of square meters, whatever it is. Exactly. And if that happens, and I have done that. Yeah. I have done that. Yeah. You can't, I wouldn't say, but you pursue, but you can have the contractors to actually follow that route. Yeah. But of course, you need to allow them to have insight into the project before they give their tender. Yeah. Which is fair. Yeah. But if you do that, I mean, you have an excellent tool of administrating your project also in construction stage.
Exactly. And I think that's a collaboration as well. Often in traditional Danish contracts, our approach would be to have a quantity verification with the contractors after you select the most advantageous contractor. Mængdeverifisering. My Danish is coming on, guys. And it's quite a useful task, and it does work as long as it's something that's agreed within the process already. And I think that quantity aspect is something that I see a big change in the Danish industry. But if we were to come to our last point here, so Peter, how do we see things developing in the future? We talked a little bit about biodiversity. We talked about, more transparency, contracts. Perhaps the AB contracts need to change, or we need an alternative version for partnering, or whatever the structure could be. But how are you seeing things in terms of?
I think all the above. We need to address that. I think one thing that is being more and more clear for the industry is that this is a common problem.
Yeah,
and it is a problem that way we have a time issue. I mean, we don't have very much time.
We can't spend 20 years.
I spent quite some time in my working life being sort of within the industry and policy making within the industry.
Yeah.
So I'm not only being a consultant, so I work very much together with the contractors and with the other clients and trying how can we deal with this. And there's definitely a movement saying we need to do this together. That is easy to say, not that easy to do.
No.
But we did come out with 33 advices here earlier this year. That was a combined effort done by the whole industry, by contractors, by material producers, by clients, by architects, etc. And action points where you should actually see what can we do as an industry as a whole. And that needs to be followed up. And that included all the above and quite a few more, actually.
Is that something that's published now?
Yeah. It was... they called it the Action Tank for Sustainable Development in the Construction Sector. It was in Danish.
Of course.
So sorry if it's an unfair translation. But basically, and I was sitting in the steering committee of that together with the high level executives of a number of Danish industry. I would almost say giants. So it has a direction. But there is also a number of partners in the industry say this is going way too slow.
Yeah.
Particularly on the consultant side, say we need to move a lot faster. We need to build faster or not build faster, but create a lower carbon footprint a lot faster than what we're doing.
And do you think that needs to be a policy change? Will that be the big steps in the coming years where we'll see more, we'll see government stepping in more and making more policy changes so that we're driving the industry harder, or is that something that the industry will do on its own back?
I think it's a both. We need guidance from above for sure. Otherwise, it's not gonna fly. But we also need to address better business models. And I think one of the things we're discussing here is actually the structure of the. One thing that we can do within our own business is to collaborate rather than the opposite.
Yeah.
And there is way too much conflict in the construction business, and if we want to solve this problem, we need to collaborate.
Yeah.
So that is one thing where we need to address it for sure, and trying to do that also, see if we can raise that.
Yeah.
And that could be a new set of contract rules, but could also be another way of approaching each other and seeing how we actually strategically can make a business that is more sane, sound.
I think that having a strategy for collaboration on the top end is all well and good, but often what you find when you get to the project level is that the people on the project level don't know how to implement that because they're years working in this siloed approach, as you mentioned earlier on, and that's all that they know. So one of the big changes we think is going to come in the industry is transparency around carbon, transparency around cost, transparency around the qualities of the information being produced by the consultants, by the contractor, etc. And digitization is helping us with this transparency.
It's a good point, Ross.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about cost transparency with our clients, but also when we're presenting at conferences and for cost managers or even clients, like being fully transparent on the economy is something that very few have done in the industry. But the reality is, if we need to be able to collaborate together, we need to be able to share all information together with the other consultants, but also with the contractor. Right. if you have a budget, if you have detail and a structure behind that you're comfortable with, like with your carbon, we have to share. We should be able to share it and say, this is what we're working towards together as a group. But that's a little easier said than done, I guess, with the traditions we have.
Yes, but it's good you say so, actually, because in the Client Association, the Danish Client Association, and I'm a chairman of the board there. We have, and I've tried to initiate and fire up that idea for some time. Say we need to collect cost information.
Absolutely,
and we could basically also collect carbon information, and have it somewhere in a shared database, so we know exactly what is driving things. Otherwise, it becomes a blurry discussion. And perhaps we should throw you into that, Ross, also see if you could.
Because I'll give you just a kind of final comment here. If we become transparent on economy and costs, LCA, our processes, time, then all we're doing as an industry is competing on our approach to project delivery. We shouldn't be competing on cost, because the reality is the cost at the end of the project will be whatever it'll be based on how well or how bad we do on the project. If we do really well, we'll keep costs down. If we do really poorly, costs are just going to go up because time will extend and we'll need to redo works, etc. So if we're transparent fully in the industry, collecting all the public work costings from all the projects, being transparent on what we're paying for, our fees, what we're paying for our overhead and profit, what we're paying for our concrete, etc. Surely that will drive better efficiency in the industry as a whole as we go forward.
Agreed.
And it'll change perhaps the relationships that we have then, because it is transparent. You're not hiding anything. I'm not hiding anything. It's all in front of us.
Agreed.
Excellent. Peter, it was a pleasure to have you on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for listening. There's a LinkedIn link below in the show notes. We would love to connect with you.
We hope you enjoyed it and have you with us in the next one. Thank you very much.